The history of Iranian women's brave fight for freedom and equality goes back over a century, a long and difficult path fighting many dictatorships who denied women their basic rights. Misogyny of the ruling despots did not allow women's struggles to be recorded properly. What the current generation knows about the struggle of the brave women of Iran has been extracted from under layers of distortion and censorship, and covers only a fraction of the bravery and heroism of those pioneering women. It covers, too, only a tiny corner of the suffering and hardship they endured over this 100-year period of struggle. This brief history is our endeavour to shed some light on the role women have played in advancing Iranian society towards freedom and emancipation. The pioneering role of women in the freedom movement of Iran has a long history. The record of kings in repressing women is very dark. Backward mullahs like Sheikh Fazlollah Nuri, who was the ideological father of Khomeini and Khamenei, covered repression against women with a religious cloth and forced them to stay in the dark corners of their homes. However, the brave women rose up and rebelled against their oppressive rulers. During the struggles of the movement for the constitutional monarchy, Iranian women gradually entered the arena, participating in social activism. Women who took to the streets from the corners of their homes during the constitutional monarchy movement, and after the basic demands of the movement were achieved, like documenting the constitution in 1906, started societies and publications for women in order to protest the degraded position of women in the society. Women like Sedige Dawlatabi and Bibi Mariam started women's organisations and publications, provided a path for the future of women's movements. One of those brave women, whose bravery and resilience became a legend for generations, is Zainab Pasha. During the tobacco movement in Tabriz, she led the people's struggle. Zainab Pasha organised 7 groups of armed women to confront the government's attempt to crush the movement. When the government authorities used force to compel the merchants in the bazaar to open their shops, Zainab Pasha and the armed women in their chadors defended the closed, protesting shops with their guns. She appeared in Tabriz Bazaar one day and said, "If you men don't dare to confront these oppressors, if you are afraid to stop thieves and plunderers from abusing your honour and wealth, then it is better that you stay at home. We, the women, will fight the aggressors." Bibi Mariam Bakhtiari was one of the few educated women at the time of the constitutional monarchy movement. She led an army to Tehran to defend freedom lovers. She fought the British alongside the southern tribes, and during the First World War, her home in Isfahan was a refuge for fighters. Dr. Mohammad Bousadeh, the leader of Iran's national freedom movement, who was the governor of Fars province at the time of Reza Khan's coup, took refuge in the Bakhtiari Mountains after the coup that he had opposed, and hence was sacked as governor. He was a guest of Bibi Mariam for a long time. William Morgan Schuster, the Treasurer General of the Constitutional Government of Iran, wrote in 1912 that from 1907 the women of Iran had become the most progressive women in the world. In Tehran alone, 12 women's associations were active in various political and social movements. According to Habl al-Matin newspaper, during a battle with the Shah's forces in Tabriz, the bodies of 20 women in men's clothes were found. During the years between 1942 and 1952, after the collapse of Reza Shah's rule during the Second World War, a relatively open political space emerged, and this provided an opportunity for women to start their activities again in the political arena. The only democratic government of Iran, Dr. Mossadegh's government, did not last long. Nevertheless, by 1952, the women of Iran had obtained the right to vote and were elected to city councils. Unfortunately, the mullahs and other reactionary forces halted Dr. Mossadegh's improvements in this regard. During the 1960s and 70s, women vigorously joined the anti-Shah movement. Given the backward culture and religious dogmas of the time, these leading women had profound impact on families and particularly on intellectual women and university students. Activist women like Fatema Amini, Marjie Uskui, Azam Rui Ahangaran, Mernoush Ebrahimi, Ashraf Ahmadi, and Musume Shadmani joined these movements and opened the way for women's participation in the coming stages of the freedom movement in Iran. Thus, the image of weak women was broken down gradually and with much hardship. For the first time, female heroines, with bravery in their own right, opened the path for the other women to participate in the struggle. Here are some names to be remembered. Fatema Amini. Fatema was born in Mashhad. She started her political activism in 1962 by forming a progressive women's organisation. After finishing her university studies, she started working as an educator. The Shah's dictatorship arrested her for her activities, and on the day she was arrested they claimed she was killed, so that they could torture her without limits to her death. Brave Fatema endured 5.5 months of the most cruel and savage torture by the Shah's henchmen. On the 16th of August 1975, she died under torture and became a symbol for the intellectual women and girls of the Iranian society. Another woman, Marjie Uskui. Marjie was an intellectual progressive woman born in Tabriz. She formed an activist group with a number of her fellow thinkers and began campaigning against the Shah's dictatorship. She was one of those women in the Iranian society under the clutches of the Shah's regime when discrimination against women and lack of women's rights was a daily normal phenomenon. By launching political activism, she brought to light the power and capabilities of women for the whole of society to see. Besides those who demonstrated and fought for freedom, opening the way for women, there were others who used their pen to show their anger against discrimination against women. Furu Farrokhzad was one of them. Furu was born on 29th of September in 1934 in Tehran. She is a renowned contemporary poet of Iran. Her poems were challenging and did not describe the prevailing family norms, nor were they in line with the accepted societal views of the time. Furu's dream, in her own words, "My wish is the freedom of women of Iran and equal rights with men. I'm well aware of the suffering of my sisters in this country because of the injustices inflicted on them by men. Half of my art is depicting their pain and sorrows. My wish is to establish the right surroundings for the scientific, artistic and social inclusion of women." In the months before the victory of the 1979 revolution, brave Iranian women took part in small and large demonstrations in cities all over Iran against the ruling dictatorship. After the overthrow of Shah, people of Iran, and particularly the brave Iranian women, were seeking their freedom and rights, hoping to establish a new just society. But Khomeini, from the day he took power, started limiting democratic rights, and especially denying women their rights and freedoms. Less than 2 weeks after the revolution, anti-women laws and regulations started coming into force one after the other. This unprecedented religiously generated repression against women has been ongoing relentlessly for over 40 years.
من هنگام حاجی حسن هستم، پرستار بیمارستان سینا بودم. که انقلاب شد من دانشجو سال آخر بودم و بعد از انقلاب فارغ التحصیل شدم و در بیمارستان سینا شاغل شدم. موقعی که تظاهرات‌های ضد شاه شروع شد، من دانشجو بودم، مثل همه دانشجوها، مثل همه مردم ایران توی تظاهرات شرکت کردم. خب انگیزه‌مونم آزادی بود، آزادی و رفاه و عدالت برای همه مردم. چون من شاهد خیلی از بی‌عدالتی‌ها، شاهد خیلی از فقر، نداری، به خصوص تو بیمارستان‌ها بودم. مردم فقیری که واقعاً سالها میدویدن تا بیان تو بیمارستان دولتی بستری بشن. خیلی چیزای دیگه میدیدم. دلم می‌خواست که مردم همه هم آزاد باشن، هم تو رفاه باشن. ما با همین انگیزه هم تو این تظاهرات شرکت می‌کردیم.
من ارزم حاجی‌زاده هستم. شغلم معلم بود. در یک خانواده مذهبی سنتی به دنیا اومده بودم که برای ما به خصوص برای تمامی بچه‌ها، ولی به طور خاص برای دخترها یک محدودیت‌های فوق‌العاده‌ای می‌ذاشتن که حتی درس خوندن رو برای دختر عیب می‌دونستن. منتها من به دلیل اینکه مادرم خودش آدم روشنی بود و معتقد بود که باید آدم تحصیل کنه و وارد اجتماع بشه، با تلاش خودش ما رو گذاشت رفتیم درس خوندیم و وارد دبیرستان شدیم.
اما بعد از سرنگونی خیلی زود متوجه شدم که خمینی کیه، چون بلافاصله هنوز چند ماه از تمام اون حرفاش که برای آزادی میزد نگذشته بود که سرکوب زنان رو شروع کرد. اولین هدفش تو جامعه سرکوب زنان بود که با حجاب شروع کرد، یعنی با روسری، و یه مش چوباقدار رو ریخت توی خیابون‌ها که به اسم مردم و میگفتن شعار یا روسری یا توسری میدادن. همینجا دیگه ماهیت خمینی کاملا برای من روشن شد.
Not to be overcome, the women of Iran flooded the streets. On the 8th of March in 1979, less than a month after the revolution, huge numbers of working women refused to go to work, and women working for the Foreign Ministry staged a demonstration outside the ministry's building. About 5,000 to 8,000 women gathered in Tehran University and chanted, "We didn't revolt to go backwards."
همه زنایی که همکار من بودن تقریبا همین حالت رو داشتن و هیچ کس حاضر نبود که با حجاب اجباری کنار بیاد. چرا؟ چون اجبار توش بود. درسته که ما مسلمان هستیم، خیلی از زنای ایرانی حجاب داشتن، چه قبل از خمینی و چه بعد از خمینی. همونطور که زیر بار هیچ حرف زوری نرفتن، زیر بار حجاب اجباری هم نرفتن و تا الان هم شاهد هستیم که زن ایرانی فقط داره میجنگه به خاطر آزادی. و البته این رژیم مرتجع، این رژیم آخوندی در درجه اول ضد زنه.
Simultaneously with abolishing women's rights, the Mullah's regime resorted to cracking down on and repressing political freedoms. The agents of the regime started attacking sellers of newspapers, bookstands, and political meetings. Another test for Iranian women was enduring the most horrific tortures in the 1980s. The repression that culminated in the massacre of prisoners in 1988 brought to light the bravery and resilience of heroines who withstood the cruelty of the mullahs with dignity. Under the mullah's rule everywhere, women have only half the rights of men, except in the matter of torture, where their share has been double that of men.
من به خاطر همین مقاومت ها، به خاطر همین که شروع کردم به جنگیدن با اینا و مخالفت با اینها، خیلی زود با سایر همکارانم خب از بیمارستان اخراج شدم. بعدش هم دستگیرم کردن. اینها لحظه‌ای از شکنجه زنان زندانی دست بر نداشتن، هرگز. من از همون ابتدا مشاهد این بودم، چه شکنجه هایی که به خودم اعمال شد، چه شکنجه هایی که به زنان دیگه اعمال شد.
من 5.5 سال در زندان‌های مختلف تو تهران بودم، از جمله زندان دادگستری، زندان اوین، زندان قزلحصار، زندان گوهردشت، که اگر بخوام براتون بگم که مثلا چه شکنجه‌هایی بر زن‌ها اعمال می‌شد، واقعیتش اصلا توی این زمانبندی نمی‌گنجه. من یک گوشه از خاطرات، یک از هزار اونچه که بر زن‌های زندانی در زندان‌های تهران رو من شاهد بودم گذشت و در کتابی به عنوان با نام بهای انسان بودن خاطراتمو نوشتم. اومدن توی زندان قزلحصار یک سلول‌هایی درست کردن به نام قفس.
داشتم از زندان میگفتن. خب خیلی چیزا رو من دیدم. من خودم مدتی رو توی همین 209 بودم. اونجا خیلی بچه ما زیر بازجویی بودیم. چنان شکنجه می‌کردن که قابل بیان نیست. پاهای بچه‌ها متلاشی می‌شد به خاطر این شدت خونریزی توی پا و هماتوم و بچه‌ها دچار از کار افتادن کلیه می‌شدن. خیلی‌هاشون زیر شکنجه شهید شدن. اسامیشون هست. خیلی‌هاشون هم که جون به در بردن بعداً توی قتل عام‌های 67 سال 67 اعدام شدن. مثلا خیلی از دوستای خودم، از همکارای خودم، چه اون موقعی که دانشجو بودیم و همکلاس بودیم و بعد فارغ التحصیل شدیم، چه اونایی که تو بیمارستان همکار ما بودن از جمله دکترها. و الان این عکس 3 تا از بچه‌های ماست، از همکلاسیای من. هر 3 تاشون اعدام شدن. توبا رجبی ثانی، تهمینه رستگار مقدم، شکر محمدزاده. موقعی که ما دستگیر شدن این عکس شکر و این عکس تهمینه رستگار مقدم. این دوتا فقط به خاطر اینکه نخواستن زیر بار حرف زور برن و نخواستن هیچ اجباری رو بپذیرن و به خاطر آزادی جنگیدن و شهید شدن.
The misogynistic mullahs could not tolerate and cannot tolerate women who dare to stand up to them. Despite the oppression by the misogynistic ruling regime, Iranian women have continued to advance their struggle step by step and little by little. Women were marginalised and humiliated with respect to professional fields, yet they proved their capability in scientific fields and obtained the highest ranks in universities around the world. Women like Maryam Mirzakhani. She was the first girl to win the gold medal in the Mathematics Olympiad. However, after getting her professional qualification from the best university in Tehran, she had to leave Iran to continue her education at Harvard University, where she got a PhD in mathematics. In 2014, she won the Fields Medal, which is the highest medal given in mathematics and given to the best scientist of the field under the age of 40. It's often referred to as the Nobel Prize of Mathematics. She's the first woman and the first Iranian to have won the prize. Maryam Mirzakhani has had immense impact on the female students in Iran, who continue to pursue their dreams in spite of all the pressures and discriminations imposed upon them by a male-dominated Iranian society. Now the women of Iran stand in the front lines of uprisings against the dictatorship and shout down with Khomeini, giving hope to millions of people. Mothers and sisters of martyrs, of uprisings and political prisoners, with their persistent protests, call on deprived people to protest and rise up. One woman in Hamadan, in front of the agents of the regime, shouted, "Down with Khomeini!" This was the first time such a slogan was shouted in the face of repressive forces. Another brave young woman who's covered her face in front of Tehran University raises her fist in defiance, becoming a symbol of the uprising. Women who've been arrested during these uprisings are the vanguards in the Iranian people's struggle against the dictatorship, in all of its forms, and are continuing to fight inside the prisons. One brave such woman is Maryam Akbari Monfared. Maryam lost her sister and a brother in the massacre of prisoners in the summer of 1988. She was arrested for attending a peaceful demonstration in 2009. Even now, she's not been given a day of furlough, even for medical treatment. She was recently sent to exile prison in Semnan, away from her family. Her fellow inmates have written about her. She was a pillar of strength who blew the wind of perseverance, cheerfulness, and selfless love for fellow inmates and for the resistance. Regardless of our beliefs, for us, her fellow inmates, Maryam was a symbol of perseverance, patience, resolve, a fighting character, steadfastness, anti-routine and drudgery, and an endless thirst for reading and learning. The brutal regime, wary of Maryam's perseverance, told her in one of their interrogations, "You are paying the price for your brother and sister." Another woman, Golrokh Irai, like Maryam, has stood up to the misogynistic regime and brought them to their knees. Iranian women are a threat to the regime for 2 reasons: historical background and social potential. Women have a history of standing up to the tyrannical regimes of the Shah and the Sheikh. Their struggles have not been in vain. It leaves its mark on the society and the soul and spirit of the women of Iran. It motivates the women to become more active in the fight against injustice and oppression. The potential of the society increases the power of women manyfold, and thus these struggles continue in Iran and become stronger and deeper from generation to generation.
برای همین زن ایرانی اتفاقا بیشتر مقاومت میکنه، اتفاقا بیشتر میجنگه. همین الان خیلی از زنانی، شما اگه دقت بکنید اخبار رو ببینید، زنهایی که توی تظاهرات ها شرکت میکنن، زنهایی که دستگیر میشن و باز به شکنجهگاه ها برده میشن، ولی کوتاه نمیان، چون نمیتونن این کارو، اینا نمیتونن جلوی در اومدن خورشید رو بگیرن، اینا نمیتونن جلوی آزادی رو بگیرن، اینا هر چقدر هم تلاش بکنن این کارو نمیتونن بکنن. به خاطر اینکه مردم آگاهن، به طور خاص زنان ایرانی، چون خیلی از این رژیم مرتجع، از این رژیم زن ستیز آزار دیدن، هرگز نمیتونن اینو فراموش کنن و هرگز نمیتونن بشینن، چون میدونن که اگر این کارو بکنن مصادف است با نابودی. خب این قابل پذیرش نیست، نه برای ما بوده نه برای اونها خواهد بود. الان کانونهای شورشی متشکل از جوانان از جمله زنان کارهایی میکنن که رژیمو به زانو در آورده.
نکته که برای من به عنوان یه زندانی فوق‌العاده انگیزاننده بود این بود که من مقاومت زنای زندانی رو در اون مقطع دیدم. بعد از اینکه من از زندان آزاد شدم که داستان مفصل و جداگانه‌ای داره، من خودم سال 65 از ایران خارج شدم، ولی از دوستانم که بعداً من اون رو دیدم داستان قتل عام زندانیان رو در سال 67 شنیدم که 30,000 زندانی رو با یک نگفتن به آخوندا اعدام کردن و این داستان همچنان ادامه داره و این مقاومت‌های جانانه و این انگیزه هایی که این زندانی‌ها داشتن این هرگز خاموش نشد و به جامعه ما منتقل شد و هنوز همچنان ادامه داره که ما می‌بینیم که در جامعه، در این کانون‌های شورشی، در دختران، زن‌های جوان و مردهای جوان و تمام ایرانیان به عنوان یک راه و رسم جنگیدن با آخوندها تعریف شده هستش و همه از اون استقبال میکنن.
The maturation of the struggle of many generations of Iranian women has culminated in the leadership of the main Iranian opposition force by one woman, Maryam Rajavi, whose 10-point platform is the antithesis of religious dictatorship. It gives a bright picture of an Iran of tomorrow, and a democratic and free Iran at that. In Paris on the 8th of March 2018, Maryam Rajavi said,
خواهران عزیزم، در شرایطی که زنان یعنی نیمی از جمعیت جهان همچنان از سرکوب و فقر و تبعیض رنج میبرند، پس هر مقاومتی علیه ستم و بیداد دستاوردی برای تمام زنان است. آری، این دستاوردها متعلق به همه ماست. و حالا به شما زنان فعال در جنبش برابری میگویم قیام خواهران شما در ایران علیه رژیم زن ستیز حاکم پیشرفتی برای همه بشریت است. هر قدمی که برای آنها بردارید، هر فعالیتی برای دفاع از زنان دستگیر شده و هر تلاشی برای افشای شکنجه زندانیان بکنید و هر کاری برای واداشتن دولت‌ها به قطع رابطه با رژیم آخوندی انجام دهید، بسیار بسیار اثرگذار خواهد بود. در شرایط کنونی خواست ما آزادی فوری زندانیان قیام، آزادی بیان و اجتماعات و لغو سرکوب و حجاب اجباری است. برای برآوردن این خواست‌ها من به یاری تک تک شما نیازمندم. و روزی که زنان ایرانی سنگر بنیادگرایی رو در هم بشکنند، آزادی و برابری در همه جهان جهش می کند و آن روز دور نیست.